juice like a snow cone. Ice in my veins and a cold flow. I'm getting cash overseas by the boatload. You wanna ride my wave? That's a no-go. Senorita's going loco. Make it bounce like a pogo. All my haters see rojo. They big mad cause they coming up short like Frodo. Activate the beast mode. I keep it hot, give your brain a heat stroke. You ain't a big shot, you some basic B-roll. The world is mine like my name's Pacino. Hey, it's Nico, I guess I'm back. Catch me in the fast lane on the right track. And my shorty is a 10 like a dime bag. Got me feeling like a millie, check the price tag. Got the party jumping like crisscross. Got the gold chain and a wristwatch. Pull up on the scene like a big shot. EDM and hip hop, ain't no time for pit stops. Got the party jumping like crisscross. Got the gold chain and the wristwatch. Pull up on the scene like a big shot. EDM and hip hop, cause my style.
Good evening and welcome everybody. This is Obi-Wan Piz for In Simplex Pachinko. We are doing some building thinking classrooms work tonight. So if anybody is interested in learning how to teach mathematics and maybe use a different method and get involved in that, then this is the place for you tonight. If you are still interested in doing like problem work. So, you know, you have a question, anything like that, math help, feel free and ask, because I can always take a little bit of a break and just do that. So, that is perfectly fine. Bum. Hope everybody's had a good weekend and a nice, restful start to your week. Lol. I'm sure that that is an appropriate term to use. Okay, so what we are doing tonight. We are looking at Chapter 3 in Building Thinking Classrooms, which is Where do students work in a thinking classroom? So we're going to be talking tonight about where and how to get students to work and how it affects their work. And as always, to top and tail this, we do want to also point everybody to Peter Liljedahl's book. I had it up. Uh-oh. There it is. So this is his book, Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, K through 12. The point here really is that, you know, this is a published work, and sure, I'm going over like all of the details in it, essentially, but that's mostly because we just want to get the word out on like how to experiment with this particular method. And if anybody like wants a more in-depth look at this, definitely buy the book, because it's worth reading it yourself, highlighting, making notes everywhere. Literally just, you know, make your own make your own copy, right? Like, make it your own. Yes, shock, right in it. So, Cesar, I don't know necessarily what the 4X category is, or what makes a game 4X versus not, but I have played several of the Civilization games throughout the history of Civilization games. 3 and 4 were kind of like my jam. And then we ended up not playing any of the rest of them since then. Because I knew that it was a humongous time sink for me, and I wasn't really going to get a whole lot out of it. Mostly because I almost never finish games. It's like my kids when they're playing other games. They've started Monster Sanctuary probably 12 times. Okay, So Peter Liljedahl says that, in order to think about the issue that we see, really the first thing that we ought to address is what is the standard classroom norm. So the normative behavior that we see in classrooms is that students are, generally speaking, passive, taking notes at desks, yeah, well, I can't make that claim. Oh. And if anybody has anything to add, specifically on like things you've seen in classrooms, be that your classrooms or classrooms where you either took or taught classes, feel free, throw that out here, and we'll discuss them. So the typical normative behavior in a class is that students are passive, they're taking notes at desks, and they're doing now you try one problems. Again, the teacher has them working in a notebook. Maybe they'll do like think, pair, share. This was a popular style when I was teaching. So have the students work on a problem by themselves. They're accountable to their neighbor immediately in order to discuss like whether or not they got it, or can you help me out with this? Where did you get that kind of thing? And then share either with a larger group or with the whole class. Okay, so one of the major problems that comes out of this is that the notebook becomes this like sacred property. Essentially, like, you don't want to desecrate it. With any wrong ideas or mistakes. Mistakes. There we go. Irony. No, I think it's alright. The music was a little loud for me, but I think that's just me personally, so we'll shift that down a little bit. So, yeah, notebook becomes this essentially sacred property. You don't want to desecrate it with wrong ideas or mistakes or anything like that. They work on homework in it, and again, if they make any mistakes on their homework, it becomes like this massive internal problem, this internal struggle. Like, oh no, I've made a mistake on my homework. It's end of the world. I need to start all over. Or it's not just a simple like. I know with me, like 99% of the time, I was writing with my I was writing with pens, so, you know, you get your standard super inky Johns Hopkins pens. And, like, you know, they would be, these were, not rollerball. What is this? I don't even remember what kind. Anyway, yeah, these are the super inky ones where if you hold it in one place for a while, it like starts bleeding into the rest of the paper. There you go, zebra. Hashtag not sponsored. So I would typically be working on all of these problems in pen, and then like having to scratch things out really felt kind of bad. Because again, you're trying to make as few mistakes as possible, but like you're in a classroom, right? You're intended to make mistakes while you're in the classroom, and it is something that I wish more of my students understood. All right, so the issue there, right? Sitting at the desks is passive behavior. It promotes lazy. No, it promotes AE. In all seriousness, sitting at desks promotes mimicking. Because again, you're supposed to be sitting at the desk. You're supposed to be working on problems, and you look at the problem that's on the board, you see the problem that's on the board, and then you're able to just carry it over to whatever you have on your paper. And it should, you know, so goes the student thinking, it should end up being the same kind of problem, both on the board and on your paper. So in theory, we should only have to, like, take individual numbers and like replace them. That's kind of the idea of where people are going when they're sitting at desks. They're being passive, and it can also encourage the slacking and faking. Right? These are students who, again, are, for the most part, don't care about anything, or don't necessarily care. Oh, nope. Sorry. Stalling, not slacking. Right? Stalling and faking. So the students who, like, are just trying to kill time in order to wait for you to do the problem itself, copy that problem into their notebook. So students who will copy the stuff into their notebook. The students who are slacking, there's like, you know, very little chance that you're going to reach them doing anything. So why not try something different if it's going to reach other students and maybe encourage these other students to not just literally do nothing. Okay, so he says that there are some students who spend more hours of their day sitting and writing in their notebooks than they end up spending sleeping. So should we then add to this by having students sit and work in their notebooks while working on thinking tasks as well? So clearly we do not want to do that. We do not want to inflict the normative behavior on students through doing different tasks. Naturally, this was done in many of the parts of the study because, again, you're just trying to vary different behaviors and keeping the institutional norm of allowing students to be sitting in their seats, allowing them to write in their notebooks, etc., was essentially perpetuating the same issues as we have before. The notebook is absolute sacred property. You don't want to desecrate it. You're going to write your homework in it. You don't want to mess up anything in there. And so you're reluctant. This is also interesting. It comes up later. You are reluctant to do things in that notebook because it's such a, sacred property. All right. And also, again, sitting at desks. We don't want to allow students to be just sat at desks because then it's going to promote that stalling and faking, even if you're doing a thinking task. It may not surface immediately, but I will tell you from experience that students will absolutely slip into prior behaviors if you give them the chance. Okay, they will slip into known patterns of behavior if they are given the chance, so don't give them the chance. Okay, that's, again, from experience. Don't let them slip into their old patterns of behavior. Do something different. Do something different often. And do something different with intention. So it's not just like, oh, this is what we're going to do today. Because, again, they will slip into their previous patterns of behavior if you let them. So don't let them. Okay. Hey, P. Vermi. Do something different. Examples. Yeah, so other stuff that we've done. We were talking about in the previous two chapters the ways in which you are trying to change the classroom behavior as a whole is by changing the culture. And so in chapter 1, the types of tasks that you are giving in a thinking classroom is... No, that's perfectly fine. And, I mean, this is like weeks, right? So definitely go back and watch the VODs. They'll be posted here and also on YouTube. I'm going to try to delete stuff, I think, in order to save these particularly. Because, yeah, we definitely want these ones. But at some point, they should be posted onto our NSimplex Pachinko math content channel. Anybody who's also interested in the Obi-Wan Pez gaming channel, feel free. Yeah, math teacher reacts. Anyway. So chapter 1 is the types of tasks that are used in a thinking classroom. And so the types of tasks that are used are what are called thinking tasks. So you don't want to start doing completely a-curricular tasks. So, you know, do a magic trick that ends up being like a literal sleight of hand magic trick. It's not going to help, right? It's not going to get kids to be like, oh, that's really cool. Let me think about this. It's going to be like, oh, you just got to practice a lot, and eventually you can get like the flick of the wrist, make it work or whatever. So you want to, if you're going to do an actual magic trick, you want to do one that's like math-based. There was a group called Highly Engaging Thinking Tasks. So, for example, how many squares are in this picture? Right? So ask that of the students, and then give them some time to figure it out, and then throw out some answers. Or throw out some of the other answers that you see around the room and have a discussion about that. It can be a really rich discussion. Oh, not just the small ones, like the big ones too. And then how can we effectively and quickly start counting them? Because that ends up becoming a that becomes a discussion about like how you can count the number of squares within a larger square thing. Ends up becoming a discussion about square numbers. So it's really fascinating to get into that. Group 2, or Chapter 2, was talking about how do we form collaborative groups. So in order to form collaborative groups, approximately once every hour, older students, community college, for instance, we just went like the whole period, but I did notice that some of the students were starting to get into the kind of social roles that Liljedahl said you want to avoid. So you kind of find your place in and among your people. Keep them off balance. Knock them over again by saying, all right, we're going to trade up the groups, and have them change up the groups. Yes, social loafing. So not literally all the time, but certainly some students will decide to do that. But the goal for groups is that you get visibly random groups of 3 changed regularly. So again, about once an hour. Visibly random, so you have to go up and, like, if you have a random number generator, have the student select a number or like roll a die or something like that. And then have them hit the randomize button that number of times, because it makes them feel like they have an amount of control over it or something. Or, yeah, okay, I can see that this is obviously random because it's not like, you selected the groups. But even if you make it look like, even if you do actually randomize the groups, if they don't think they're random, they'll just be like, psh, whatever. I know that he put me with the smart kid because he wants me to catch up. That sort of thing. And when they get to potentially work with their friends or not, then there's a little bit of a give and take that they're like, okay, well, maybe next time. Yeah, so the explicit roles for groups oftentimes end up having a somewhat negative effect, because again, now they start looking at, okay, that's my job for the day. I don't have to do the thinking. Right? If I'm writing, if I'm the recorder, I don't have to actually think about the problem. And, the leader being like, oh, well, I can just, delegate the problem. I don't have to do the thinking. Timekeeper. Again, I'm concentrating on the clock. I don't have to do the thinking. I'm the gopher. I'm getting the other stuff. I don't need to do the thinking. So, again, it becomes basically a race to the bottom. Who's going to deign to do the actual physical work of thinking? So, Peter Liljedahl says, this particular setup where you have like explicit roles. It's cool and all, but it just doesn't work. Again, people think that their job is something different and that they can no longer they no longer bear the responsibility of being the thinking person in the group. So, toss it all out the window. Again, if you have visibly random groups of 3 was found to be the optimal number. 2, you tend to have too little diversity in your group, being diversity of thought or different perspectives. And larger than 3, you tend to have not enough. What was the other one? Diversity and integration. Redundancy. So in larger groups, there's too much redundancy. And so people have too much in common with each other, and they start breaking off into smaller groups and being like, okay, these people, these are my people who are from the same high school as me. These are my people who are from the same country as me. These people speak my language. These people are my religion, whatever. They start breaking off into these smaller groups if it's larger than 3. If it's 4, maybe. Oftentimes it'll be 2 and 2, or sometimes it'll be 3 and 1. That's really bad. But typically when you have a group of 3, everybody has to work together in order to have, a little bit of perspective taking and diversity of thought. And also, there's a little bit of redundancy where you're like, oh, I have something in common with you. We went to middle school together and had like this teacher. Oh yeah, I remember that teacher. There's all sorts of stuff that can happen, and you want to give space for that kind of stuff to happen, while at the same time not giving too much space that they're going to start socializing beyond just a quick, simple chat of finding where you're similar and where you're different from each other, and trying to understand, the cool differences and the cool similarities. So then tonight is all about where are we actually going to have them work. So the specific work. Goodness, it's really windy up here. Not just for comedy, yeah. Okay, so again, the problem that we stated up above, from taking notes, completing Now You Try One tasks, and doing homework, the notebook is this absolute sacrosanct object. You must absolutely work in the notebook, and there is nowhere else that you can work. So obviously we want to break them out of that. So he says that continuity of workspace ensured a continuity of student behaviors. So, like I said there, students will slip into known patterns of behavior if given the chance. Sitting and working in notebooks promotes and rewards in continuous and ubiquitous ways passive mimicking behaviors. And then, if we ask students to work their way through thinking tasks while sitting and working at their notebooks, it's not surprising we get the same result he did some visiting teacher work in this lady, Jane's class, and it was completely and utterly a failure because he was a student teacher or postdoc or something like that, maybe PhD student, and asking all these students, to do these tasks. But again, they were just falling into the same sorts of behaviors, and he couldn't quite get why. So this is the culmination of 400 other teachers working with him for 15 years. So then, what do we do? So he comes up with this idea. Just because the notebook is the appropriate place for some activities, it does not have to be the workspace for all activities, and decides that he is going to start diversifying the locations that he starts getting students to work. So he began experimenting with alternative workspaces as part of the lesson where students are working on thinking tasks. So he decides, let's be the contrarian, because so far the only actual good results have typically come, or not only, but the best results have come from taking the taking the birdcage, if you will, hashtag do not do this at home, and rattling it a bit. Right? So take the student's workspace and completely turn all of their expectations upside down. Do something that is contrary to the institutional norms, like we talked about before. So the first thing he did was have students stand up and write on portable whiteboards that were lying on their desks. So this worked great when chairs could move. Where the chairs and the desks were attached to each other, they had some problems. And students almost always went back to their seats. Whenever the chairs and desks were attached to each other. So, that didn't help much. Although it still produced more thinking and engagement than having them write in their notebooks, there was still non-thinking behavior, like the stalling and faking that we were talking about before. So stalling is students who basically are doing anything that they can that is not academically oriented. It is, going to the bathroom or talking with their friends or all sorts of other stuff. They're not even pretending to do the work. They're just pretending to do something. or actually doing something. And then faking is at least pretending to do work. You're not actually doing anything. Maybe you're scribbling in your notebook a little bit, but it's usually not mathematically oriented in any way, shape, or form. It may be sharpening your pencil. It may be, talking to other students about homework, but maybe like last night's homework or a different class's homework, not this one. Right, so still faking, still not doing the work that you're supposed to be doing, but at least it's academically oriented. Okay, then he tried having students work at wall-mounted whiteboards while standing through the thinking tasks. This almost immediately and completely eliminated the stalling and faking behavior and had a huge effect on the amount of time students were willing to spend thinking when working on thinking tasks. Right? Again, almost eliminated stalling and faking behaviors in total. So, like, a few students still doing it, but nonetheless, almost the entire class completely on task for at least a longer amount of time. When we coupled this with the benefits of visibly random groups, the thinking behavior increased by an order of magnitude. So, this becomes what Peter Liljedahl picks up. Not yet. So, vertical surfaces while standing in visibly random groups, so coupling it with the previous Chapter 2 stuff. In all the 15 years that he engaged in the thinking classroom research, nothing we have tried had such a positive and profound immediate effect on student thinking as having them work in random groups at vertical whiteboards. Students were thinking longer, discussing more mathematics, and persisting when tasks got hard. The changes were so transformative, quoting, I decided to run a controlled experiment wherein we compared student thinking and engagement for a number of variables across 5 different workspaces. Students standing at vertical whiteboards, sitting at horizontal whiteboards, standing at flip chart paper mounted on the wall, sitting at flip chart paper on their tables, and sitting with their notebooks. Students were put into groups and randomly assigned one of the 5 workspaces, as they were randomly assigned everything else. In each classroom that we ran the experiment, all 5 workspaces were being used concurrently. So one group was doing each of the things. Once assigned to a workspace, all groups in that classroom were given the same thinking task to work on while we timed their behaviors across 3 variables. How long, in seconds, did it take them to start thinking about the problem, or to start talking about the problem with each other? How long, in seconds, did it take them to make their first mathematical notation, physically touching pen to paper, on whatever workspace they were assigned to? And 3, how long in minutes were they willing to keep working without teacher intervention to encourage them to keep going? All right, and then there was other stuff that they included, which was 4, how much discussion was there? 5, how eager and enthusiastic were they to start? 6, the degree to which every member of the group participated in the activity. 7, how persistent were they at trying the problems? 8, the amount of knowledge mobility. And 9, what was the degree to which their written work was non-linear? So just like all over the place, rather than start here, end here, next column, etc. Regarding variable 8, the amount of knowledge mobility, initial attempts at having students work on vertical whiteboards showed us how much movement of ideas occurred and how positive it was. We start talking about that in some future chapters. In variable 9, the degree to which their written work was nonlinear, the studenting research had shown that when students are not mimicking, their work tends to be messier than when they are mimicking. Although this was not a perfect indicator of thinking, he just felt like adding it in there and see what happens. So, running this in 5 different classrooms. I should have done this earlier. Oh, don't do that. What are you doing? No. Done. Add to Discord. Ow. Oh, there it goes. Ba-ba-bum. Add this. No, get out of the way. All right. copy image and paste it over here. I think should work. Good. Excellent. So as we can see here, I kind of, the page got turned a little bit there. So we got notebook is like way over in the corner. It's fine. All right, so here we get vertical whiteboard, number groups 10. Time taken to get to the task was 12.8 seconds. Now, when we compare that to the other ones going across, horizontal whiteboard and notebook aren't like statistically significant, right? 12.8, 13.2, and 13.0 are probably within error, give or take. Vertical paper is a bit quicker at 12.1, and horizontal paper took a full like second and a half on average to get them started. Right? Time to writing their first notation, 20.3 seconds. Okay, horizontal whiteboard was 23.5. That's a bit more. Vertical paper and horizontal paper are over 2 minutes compared to 20 some odd seconds. And notebook is about 18.2, a little bit quicker. So it's a little bit quicker in the same way that horizontal whiteboard is a little bit longer, right? It's within 2 to 3 seconds, give or take. So the average is not that significant. But then we look at the vertical, right? The paper. Hang on. Let me leave. Okay, well, we'll just go like that. Well, if we close Discord, we can't be in voice anymore, so. Hang on. Cool. I am really bothered by the new ads in Discord. It's ridiculous. Anyway. Hey, famous. Right, so again, we see a bit of a problem here. The time it takes for the students to write their first bit of notation on the actual horizontal and vertical paper is through the roof. It is over 2 minutes compared to the other two, or compared to the other three methods that are there. Again, these other ones really aren't like significant, so you know, we could probably let that go. The number of minutes that they stay on task in these last three, the notebook and the two paper forms, are just over 3 minutes. Whereas the horizontal whiteboard, they stayed on task for almost 5 minutes. And the vertical whiteboard, they stayed on task for 7 minutes, again, on average, before they either asked the teacher for help or got off topic onto something else. Right, so looking at this, we see that, again, 14.1 is not like a huge difference to time to like start working on the task, but it's significantly different anyway. We see that our, again, 12.8 average for the vertical whiteboard on time to task ends up only really being beaten by vertical paper. And then like the notebook and the horizontal board, roughly speaking, are going to be very similar times to those. So, not much changed. Again, time to first notation, we got 20 seconds to get to the first notation on the vertical whiteboard, 23.5 seconds on average to get to the first notation on the horizontal whiteboard, and 18.2 seconds to do first notation in the notebook. So that's pretty good. Right, 7.1 for the vertical whiteboard. The horizontal whiteboard, pretty good. Still under 5. All right, their eagerness to start. So again, this is like how much discussion. Oh, they skipped one. Ah, they swapped them. Okay, so the eagerness to start is kind of a scale of 0 to 3 in terms of their behaviors. This one got a solid 3. Now, I grant you that is subjective, but at the same time, across all of their classes, right, there is a lot of, like, interest is what they're seeing. In the horizontal whiteboard, we've got a 2.3. That's pretty good, too. There's going to be a lot of students who are, getting involved, starting to discuss the problem, asking what's going on, how can we, think about this. Over on the other side, though, we see that these only get scores of 1.2, 1.0, and 0.9 for the notebook. Those are all pretty not great. There was essentially almost no eagerness to get started to do stuff. All right, same thing on the amount of discussion. There's a lot of discussion for both the vertical whiteboard and the horizontal whiteboard. And there is a mid amount of discussion for the vertical paper, but like very little discussion for horizontal paper and notebook. All right, the amount of participation that students engage in ends up having, again, a lot of individual participation at the vertical boards, a moderate amount of participation at the horizontal whiteboard, and probably the vertical paper doesn't have that much of a difference to it. Horizontal paper, again, this is like mid-level, and then the notebook ends up having this 0.9. So, again, almost no participating, or in many groups, there was practically no participating. The amount of persistence that they would keep working on the problem, even if things got hard, tied at 2.6 for vertical and horizontal whiteboards. But then significantly less for the paper objects. So I'm not going to highlight that in the bronze one here. Right, it's all about the same, and it's not like significantly, I mean, it's significantly lower, but it's not like danger zone. Right, the amount of knowledge mobility. So this is the amount of time that the students would spend talking with other students about the problems. They get a 2.5 on the vertical whiteboard, and a 2.0, we can give that an honorable mention, for the vertical paper, but then, like, this is also kind of interesting, a 1.2 for the horizontal whiteboard, and for the horizontal paper, and for the notebook. And then the nonlinearity of work is off the charts for our whiteboards, horizontal or vertical, and then, like, practically non-existent. Again, not much to none on paper. So what is going on here? Have a think about that. We'll be back in 3 minutes. We'll do an ad break. have a think about why it is that this pattern exists almost exclusively on vertical, horizontal, or notebook paper, does not exist on horizontal or vertical whiteboards, and across almost all groups, right? The knowledge mobility, amount of discussion, amount of persistence, amount of participation, the nonlinearity of work, eagerness to start, the time spent on task, the time taken to get to the first notation, and the time to get to the task or discuss the task with your group is potentially lower, if not significantly lower, depending on which particular modality, in a couple of these areas. So have a think about that. Discuss it with each other in chat. All right, we'll be back in 3.
Two's company, we're limited. In the end, we lay in the end. I seen the end before the beginning, but I began anyway. I began. 'Cause all it took was a love, and for you to say
Well, ironically, right, I didn't give you all a good thinking task, so... Alright, tonight we have discovered that somebody over here has discovered the secrets of whoopie pies. If anyone does not know what a whoopie pie is, this one was cut in half, and as such it got kind of mutilated. But it is 2 halves of a what is essentially cake, and then you get a filling that's made of somewhere between whipped cream and frosting, and it goes in between the cakes, and then you mash them together. This one has a pistachio like center, so it is going to be pretty awesome, and like a little dollop of frosting or something on the top. Like I said, it's somewhere between. That depends on how well it's made. I have seen soufflés which are very small and collapse under their own weight. But you get the right amount of baking soda, leaven it correctly, and it can do pretty well. Yeah, this is going to be fun. So, if you are from the Northeast of the United States, you probably already know what a whoopie pie is, but to anybody else who doesn't have any Northeastern friends, like I said, you basically make like cake batter and then throw it into circular little dollops all over a baking sheet, and then they puff up a bit, and they become, I mean, the good ones are like about that big, so anywhere from 4 to 6 inches in diameter is like a really good one. And then the frosting filling, whatever, typically is made of shortening, first of all, vegetable shortening, sugar, butter, maybe some milk, whipped cream. Kind of depends on where you're going with it. And the best ones you can find will be in a random gas station in the middle of nowhere. And they will be wrapped in saran wrap, and it'll say whoopie pies like $1 or $2 or something like that. Maybe they're a little more expensive now, but they will be nondescript, and it'll look kind of sketchy, just like with sushi. I guess they won't have milk if they're left out, right? It'll be shortening and sugar. But, you know, like I said, the best ones will be just in saran wrap. They'll be on the counter, and they'll say whoopie pies like $2. And if you find one of these, I promise you, give it a shot. Most likely, well, it's made by old Jean down the corner, and she's been making them for 30 years and been selling them in our gas station. So if you end up seeing one of these whoopie pies, like I said, definitely give it a shot. Let's see. We will also throw out. Let's see if it's in here. Whoopie pie is not in here. My goodness. Well, we're going to have to write to him about that. He's been dead for 20 years. Um, All right, well, we'll throw out a couple of words from John Gould's Maine Lingo, A Wicked Good Guide to Yankee Vernacular. Um, um, interesting. Okay, so tonight's words are going to be a woodpile cousin. Woodpile cousin is about like a buttonhole relation, which we can go back and see that later, but less likely to mean actual blood connections. Perhaps main usage is explained by the old German Sprichwort, two who steal wood together are friends for life. So a woodpile cousin is going to be a bit like blood brother, I guess, would be a good way to do that. Ooh. And we'll also grab another one here. Witness tree. A witness mark is a stake or a post set by surveyors as a reference point. In surveying Maine, trees were plentiful enough, so nobody had to drive any stakes. When seen in the wilderness, a witness tree is easily recognized by its blazes, spots, and daubs of paint. Also see shagamaw. Witness tree. On my parents' property in New Hampshire, we had a number of witness trees, but we also had they actually did take stakes and drive the stakes so that they could see them from multiple directions. The problem with actually putting a blaze on a tree is that you can only kind of see it from like 90 degrees, give or take, on one side of it. Yeah, they probably could put a rope around it or whatever, but, you know. All right, and I am breaking probably the number one rule in eating whoopie pies, which is that I am, in fact, using a fork and knife. Now, as much as everyone would complain, the reason I'm doing it is because I don't really want to get crumbs everywhere, particularly all over my glove thing. Snickers bar, no. I will not use a knife and fork on many other hand foods unless I am explicitly attempting to avoid sullying my particularly nice or electronics related paraphernalia. Yeah, my daughter keeps complaining about the one friend of hers, who is British, who eats her pizza with a knife and fork. She and all of her American friends are like... Look, maybe she doesn't want to get her uniform dirty. Maybe she knows that about herself. Although I will say, right, my daughter is probably uniquely unaware about her messiness. Love you, kid. Maybe someday she'll watch this and be offended. Alright. Where were we? Alright, so over here. Again, the idea that we were looking at is that a lot of these individual modalities where the students were writing on either a vertical whiteboard, a horizontal whiteboard, vertical paper, horizontal paper, again, these are large, like flip chart papers, or in their personal notebook. We see a lot of these, which are highlighted in this sort of bronzy, orangey color, that end up having this like low score on the 0 to 3 range for numbers 4 through 9. Right? 0 being none at all, and 3 being a lot. These are average scores across the number of groups that we see here at the top. So 10, 10 for whiteboards, 9, 9 for papers, and 8 for notebooks. So we see that, again, the highest scores are earned on vertical whiteboard, generally speaking. There are a couple that are at least like reasonably close. Again, here, the time to just getting on task is about 12.8 seconds for vertical whiteboard. It was 12.1 for the vertical paper, which, okay, fine. That is statistically significant, maybe. Time to get on task, 13.2 and 13.0. I thought from 12.8, probably not super significant. However, the time to first notation, so the first thing that they write a mathematical notation on their particular modality. Vertical whiteboard 20.3, notebook 18.2 seconds after starting the task. Right? Again, maybe those are like not really statistically significant. Notebook still wins out a little bit. But then we've got vertical paper and horizontal paper, which are over 2 minutes. And I suggested, does anyone have any idea why something like that might be the case? Or the time spent on the task before they stopped and either asked the teacher or got distracted by something else was roughly 3 to 3.5 minutes. Whereas on whiteboards, it was between 4.5 and 7 minutes. Vertical whiteboard winning out the day on that one. I mean, that's kind of wild, right? I will accept speculation. So why might it be that, again, generally speaking, these three categories scored lower on most things, or statistically significantly lower than the best? Again, vertical paper on time to task, notebook on time to task, and first notation in notebook were actually pretty reasonable. But apart from that, vertical paper, horizontal paper, and notebooks scored kind of miserably. Why? It's ENCE, isn't it? Yeah, of course, because permanent is the... Anyway. Right, what it basically comes down to is the permanence versus the impermanence of these things. So that at least explains a significant portion of the issues that do occur. Not that all of them have the same issue, but where the issues occur. It ends up being that your vertical paper and your horizontal paper have this feeling of permanence, that they are going to be there, right? Whatever you do, it's on display. It is there for everyone to see, and everything that you screwed up on is right there in the open. When we see the reluctance for the first notation, right? 2 full minutes before these students write anything mathematical on their vertical paper or their horizontal paper. The flip chart paper, again, gives that feeling of permanence, and that the intention is that this paper is to be displayed for everyone to see. Right? So what are they doing? Well, they want to put their best work on it. Just like what we were saying up above, the individual students did not want to write in their notebooks if it was going to be, potentially wrong or anything like that. They wanted to just put in all of the stuff that was then going to be a good representation of their work. It was supposed to be sort of this, again, your notebook is your sacred property, and it is your sacred space to be able to do this mathematics in free of mistakes. At least, again, that's what these students had thought-ish. Two of our friends are moving away, so they gave me some nice stuff. This is a coffee-based tequila, which I'm not generally a big fan of tequila, because I got sick on it once. But this being so washed in coffee, it just gives the sweet agave flavor. Pretty good. Hashtag not sponsored. So anyway, the flip chart paper is giving that feeling like it's going to be displayed, like it's going to be permanent. Again, you can't change anything once it's on that paper, but you could just literally flip the paper, right? Start over. A lot of a lot of students are averse to that particular feeling as well. They don't want to potentially lose time going down a wrong path. All right, so then how to explain these couple of things up here? Again, this is still that kind of feeling like the notebook. The notebook is yours, so like you can take a few risks in it. You can write the notation in it and be wrong. You could just, you know, it's your space. It's a little bit easier to work with than something that is intended to be displayed to the entire class. Like, nobody's going to look in your notebook, right? In theory. Or you point out the thing that you want the teacher to look at. And they're not going to look at the, 5 other times you scribbled something out. Whereas on the paper, it's obvious, right? And what about on the whiteboards? Well, same deal. Because it's impermanent, we have this sense of being able to do more, to take more risks, and say like, now I can write something, even if it's completely wrong. I will write it on the board, we'll talk about it, and if it's wrong, we'll just erase it. Right? If it ends up being wrong, we'll just clear it out. We'll do something different. Right? And then what about a lot of these other things that we have? So, like less time on task, less eager to start. The knowledge mobility becomes an interesting one. Right? This is because this is not on display. Right? You don't share this stuff with other people out there because it's your groups. You have a sense of ownership. So when you have something that is a horizontal whiteboard or paper, it's on your desk, it's part of your group, you are standing around it. It is yours. And so if somebody comes over and says, hey, did you do X, Y, and Z, can you help me with this thing? Maybe you'll share. But it's also harder to even get the knowledge to the other people in your group, because then you keep having to like turn the board or walk around it or other stuff like that. Right? And then the non-linearity of the work at the bottom. The vertical paper, the horizontal paper, and the notebook all seem to be fairly linear. Again, a 1.0, 1.1, and a 0.8 for non-linearity. This ends up showing us that these students are thinking that, again, this is something to be displayed, or it is something to be a final draft. Whereas over on the whiteboard side, we see again that the nonlinearity is a 2.7 to a 2.9. Okay, something's going on there, right? So because it's impermanent, because we can just erase it if it's wrong, then we can have multiple threads of thought that are working at different places all around the whiteboard. You probably don't see that too much with me, even in this like blank void space that I'm working in here. I tend to work on something kind of vertically and then jump to the next column and keep working on it like that. There are some times where we jump back the other direction. There are some times where we jump around, either above or below already existing work. But for the most part, it's fairly linear in terms of how we work in this void space. Just because I have an infinite amount of space, right? So I can just keep going like this all the way across as far as I want to go. All right, and then the other stuff is harder to explain. So how are we going to explain all of this stuff? Right? The amount of discussion, the eagerness to start, the amount of participating, and the amount of persistence into like how does being on a whiteboard specifically help those things? Doesn't seem to make any sense. Again, maybe it has something to do with just being different, but then again, if you're on vertical or horizontal paper, that should also be different in theory, right? That is also different than your standard sit at your desk and work in your notebook. But I think we're also seeing play into it the other stuff from above, where people are hesitant to start working on the task and to stay on task. And so because of that, we see the amount of discussion kind of dwindle, the amount of participation kind of dwindle, because they're self-conscious. They want to get it right. They're more concerned with it being on display to the rest of the class, whereas in the whiteboard, throw some crap at the wall and see if it sticks, right? Let's just go for it, see what happens. All right, so Liljedahl gets into this, and he says that having students work on whiteboards produce better results across almost all variables than if the students worked on flip chart paper, irrespective of whether they were standing or sitting. The data also show that across almost all variables, any alternate workspace produced better results than having them work through thinking tasks in their notebooks while sitting at their desks. Almost. Observations and interviews with students during this experiment and in other settings have since revealed that the main reason for this is that when they work at whiteboards, they can quickly erase errors, which for them reduces the risk of trying something. Again, it allows for risk-taking because you could just erase it if you're wrong. And in a space, especially K through 12, where students are already feeling pretty self-conscious, especially 7 to 12, right? I don't mean age, grades, 7 through 12, right? Students are going to be super self-conscious about literally everything because they absolutely, have that social hierarchy that they're working within. While the private, familiar, and small nature of notebooks provides the same sense of low risk, very public and permanent nature of flip chart paper creates much more risk and places greater emphasis on being correct. The time to first notation across these 5 workspaces is reflective of these insights from students. So again, through interviews and through the data themselves, they attempted to first look at the data and then second, use the interviews to tease out what exactly is going on with this, especially for the time to first notation. That is wild, right? The results also show that with both flip chart paper and whiteboards, standing produced better results than sitting. This is not surprising. We know from physiology that standing is better than sitting, not just in a sitting is the new smoking kind of way. Standing necessitates a better posture, which has been linked to improvements in mood and increases in energy, and there are papers to back it up. We also know that the majority of communication is nonverbal, current modality notwithstanding. consisting of gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language. Okay, fair enough. Standing gives a larger canvas for these forms of nonverbal communication. Standing also afforded an increase in knowledge mobility. Having students work vertically makes their work visible to everyone in the room, thereby increasing the porosity of the groups, which in turn heightens the possibility that any students will allow ideas to move between the groups. As mentioned in Chapter 2, increases in knowledge mobility also increases students' reliance on each other, both within and between groups, while at the same time decreasing their reliance on the teacher as the sole source of knowledge in the room. All right, this is huge. So making sure that the teacher is not the sole source of knowledge in the room. Trying to get the students to see that you are, each other, able to figure out tasks, honestly, better than just coming up to, the person who's supposed to be the expert and asking them what the next step is in the problem. All of these reasons for why vertical work surfaces produce better results are shown to be even, overshadowed by something else, which they teased out through the conversations and interviews with the students, that when students are sitting, they feel anonymous and therefore unaccountable. They no longer have to do the work. They no longer have to do the thinking if they're sitting down because they think that they can just hide and be anonymous. No one knows who they are. No one knows what work they're doing because they're sitting at their table. They're sitting at their desk. They're over here, right? They're not up there. When they're at the wall, when they're working at a whiteboard, they feel more accountable both to their group and to the other people in the room. The further they sit from the teacher and the more things, desks, other students, computers, etc., that are between them and the teacher, the more anonymous they can be. And when they feel anonymous, they're more likely to disengage both consciously and unconsciously. So, having students stand immediately takes away the sense of anonymity, and with it the conscious and unconscious pull away from the tasks at hand. This is not to say that students feel outed or on display in any sort of way necessarily. When all of the students are working on vertical whiteboards, they don't feel unsafe because naturally everybody's doing the same thing. Now they don't have to worry about it as much. But they don't feel safe enough to disengage, to get off task and go do something else. Right? This and the non-permanence afforded by whiteboards make the vertical whiteboards the best possible space for students to do their thinking. At the same time, vertical whiteboards offered an extra advantage from the teacher's point of view. From our own observations during this experiment, as well as numerous settings in using vertical whiteboards, we know that this workspace provides teachers with the ability to see everything that's happening in the room, and this enhances their ability to know at all times where a group's thinking is, how far they have progressed, and when and where it's necessary to provide hints and extensions. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Right. Right. Ability to see every group. Ability to their thought process. And the ability to provide hints and extensions, which we'll get to. Right? It's not in this particular chapter, but hints and extensions are ways in which the goal here is to get students into what's called flow state. You all have seen it on this stream because I have done it on Satisfactory and Against the Storm. Both of them, I have entered a flow state. I no longer care about what time it is. I have gone till 4 in the morning sometimes. Oof. Right? But the idea is, again, here we get the students into this flow state by anytime that they're getting frustrated by not being able to do something, you give them a reasonable hint which pushes them in the right direction and hopefully unlocks more discussion to be had in their group. If they're starting to get bored because the problems are too easy or repetitive, then you provide extensions which then allow them to increase the challenge level of the problems they're working on, which then allow them to go further into the curriculum than some of the other groups will. Right? And if you can increase a particular group's challenge rating and give them something that's much more interesting to work on, then they'll be more engaged and they can actually further the entire class's progress. And we'll see that when we get to some of these future sections as well. Okay, how far they're progressed in the task and when and where. Right. That's fine. Discussed at length in Chapter 9, especially. Aids teachers with continual formative assessment and the ability to provide and solicit feedback. Most teachers do not work in classrooms with whiteboards to accommodate 10 to 12 groups at the same time. And for the last 20 years, classrooms have been outfitted with fewer and fewer whiteboards and more technology. Brand new schools often provide teachers with only one small whiteboard on the assumption that their teaching practice will primarily utilize technological alternatives to writing on boards. Retrofitting these classrooms with enough whiteboards for 8 or more groups to work comfortably can be expensive. Our particular school had rolling whiteboards. They were about 3 feet by 4 feet, maybe 5 feet, and were on wheels. So they were also dual-sided, so you could turn them around as necessary, or have potentially groups work on either side of them. Not necessarily recommended. It gets a little tricky sometimes. However, there are a number of very good, inexpensive alternatives. For one, blackboards are fine. It doesn't have to be whiteboards, right? Chalk. I know Zach is a proponent of using actual chalk. I personally can't stand it all that much. I looked up at our vent intake, and it was covered in yellow, just all around it because of the amount of chalk that was in the air. And I was like, I'm really glad that it's COVID and I'm wearing a mask. Because for, the 10 years prior, I'd been breathing all that in. One of my coworkers at a different school that I was working for, this was the one that I worked for a quarter before they, unfortunately, it was from St. Patrick's Day until June. They were like, hey, so we're losing 3 positions, and you came in on St. Patrick's Day, so, last in, first out? And I'm like, yeah, well. They're like, we really want to keep you on, but at the same time, we just can't. I'm like, all right. See y'all later. Windows also work as a viable, vertical, erasable surface, as well do vinyl, picnic table covers, shower curtains, and cellophane, the kind of thick cellophane that you get gift baskets or wrap flowers in. More rigid alternatives include products that can be bought at home at home improvement stores, made of medium density fiberboard with a white melamine finish on one side, referred to as shower board. Most of these, I will state, you should use alcohol wipes to clean, which is very bad for windows. Windows are typically bad for pictures and seeing items on the board. So you need like a solid single color background. And if you've got like the sky behind your whiteboard, or behind your windows, it's not too bad. But we had like a road that also had a lot of trees. And all of this like mottled tree color that was behind, as a background to our room was extremely distracting. Not necessarily to the groups in the moment, but as a teacher walking around the room trying to read something from like 20 feet away, it was really hard. You had to like, manipulate yourself into a weird position so that you could see sky behind what you wanted to see. But if you're using Windows, make sure that you either have an alcohol-based wipe, or I think like Windex will work just fine. So ammonia-based. And Liljedahl says, there has never been a classroom that we could not outfit in some way, shape, or form in order to accommodate every single group working on a vertical, non-permanent surface. And that is where we get the other word that I was like hesitant to throw in here. right? These are vertical, non-permanent surfaces. Typically, he will shorthand this as VNPS. Or VNPSes. So these vertical non-permanent surfaces are literally anything. So whiteboards, blackboards, again, the windows, if you're using some sort of erasable markers. Dry erase work fine on the windows. However, the cleaning crew is really upset with me, even to this day. Because again, it made kind of a mess, especially if students didn't clean up after themselves. They'd walk in and be like, "What the absolute F is going on in this room?" I actually had one that they messed up the blinds in some sort of way that it locked them down. And like I tried to go up and like unlock it or pull it up or whatever, and it just wouldn't go. I was like, okay, they messed with this, and like they intentionally screwed with this in order to prevent me from using the windows as a whiteboard. Okay, so then Liljedahl continues. When coupled with random groups, the non-thinking behaviors like slacking, stalling, and faking, for the most part, fell away entirely. When coupled with the use of thinking tasks given early in the lesson and the ability, when coupled with the use of thinking tasks given early in the lesson, the ability to mimic disappears. In fact, it's really that students are no longer interested in mimicking because they're engaged in such a way that they're not going to be able to slip into this idea of, oh, just remember the example and let's throw in the same, these different numbers into the same format. They can't do that anymore. If an appropriate thinking task is created at the beginning of class, it's Zach, everybody. Sorry to call you out. I gotta rework that so it's more like pen centers, so that it'll only actually activate when you actually say something. I know, right? Kind of curious if that's going to do it. In theory, I've been there the whole time, so. I've been here the whole time. Alright, anyway. Rocket League anthem. Oh, excellent. Yes. I also need to make a new unlurk. So I have an unlurk command. But I need to link it. Oh, maybe I don't. Huh. Alright, well, whatever. But I need to link that with a clip from Square One TV. Specifically MathNet. Specifically the trial of George Frankly. Basically, I don't know if I want to give away too much, but George gets locked, George gets kidnapped and thrown in a closet, and a master of disguise takes his place in a courtroom and starts throwing his case, and then is basically I plead guilty, I'm guilty, I say, and everybody's like, that's not George, what is the matter with this? And then he bursts into the courtroom and says, my name is George Frankly, and I've just come out of the closet. This show, let me tell you, was full of adult humor and references that my father was like rolling on the floor laughing almost every single episode. But yes, George bursts into the courtroom wearing, his undershirt and large heart patterned boxers and his socks, and like that's it. Because the master of disguise stole all the rest of his clothing. Anyway. So yeah. Vertical non-permanent surfaces, coupled with random groups, coupled with thinking tasks early on in the lesson, and the ability to mimic or the willingness to mimic completely disappears. So we get the thinking task, which gets the students primed to do actual thinking and actual work in the classroom, and then we start easing them into all of the easing them into the actual curriculum, and by throwing tasks that they already know how to do but extend it a little bit further, and then increasing the challenge level as necessary, the students then walk their way through the curriculum without any real need to talk with the teacher explicitly about how to do it. They can start working off of each other and figuring it out by themselves entirely. Now, it does take a while to make that happen. But again, shifting the culture of the classroom first to working off of each other and understanding that we're going to start with a thinking task at the beginning, and you all are going to get like a 2-minute lesson on, how something should work, or how, why it works a particular way. That's as much as you're getting from the teacher. You will get absolute hints or extensions if you need them, but honestly, I should be the one walking around giving them out rather than people asking for them. Unless, genuinely, I just am not able to get around to that particular group. Most of the time, they engage with each other, and then they start saying, like, okay, now we're going to, since we understand it, we're going to spread out to the whole rest of the classroom, and we're going to explain it to other groups, or at least, give them a nudge in the right direction. And it almost becomes like Outer Wilds. I swear. Where, like, they'll go to each other's groups and just give them enough of a hint in the right direction to push them so that they can get it. And it's almost like when a number of us, like serial Outer Wilds watchers, go to someone's stream to watch them play Outer Wilds. Like, we want to shut up and just watch the process. It's really especially helpful, or it's especially that way for me being a teacher, but, that's just me. Right, so Liljedahl says, what's left is an environment that not only supports thinking, but necessitates it. Since I began this research over 15 years ago, and ever since, I have never found a workspace that even comes close to these particular results. So having these particular things in effect in every single classroom is like the number one goal for every teacher immediately. Thinking tasks at the beginning, visibly random, groups of 3, changed frequently, and students working at vertical non-permanent surfaces while standing. Those are like the three things. If you can get those three things done, you will shift the classroom entirely to having a new culture. And like if you're transparent with them, at least a little bit, you don't have to be completely transparent, but a little transparent with them, you can actually get them on board with it and be like, hey, so we're doing this thing and it's going to be a little bit different, but we're going to shift, your ability to do things. And here's the other thing. Don't even tell them the first few times. I was honest with my classes probably after about a month. Now, they are also college students. So I waited about a month and then started explaining to them exactly how all of this stuff was supposed to work. And a lot of them appreciated it. A lot of them went with it and started like really hammering in on, let's get this done. Let's do it. Because I like this a lot better than just sitting on my rear. Some students would rather have just sat and done nothing. And it showed. But, it's oftentimes it took a little while to get there. Before they were attempting to actually subvert the process. Mostly because, I'm the authority in the classroom, so therefore they must rail against it no matter what. All right, anyway, we're going to go to ad break for 3 minutes, and then we will get on to the last few sections, which are the FAQ and questions to think about, and some, try this stuff. So we will be right back. Take 3 minutes, get up, stretch, cycle your water, do what you need, and we shall return for the finale. See you in a little bit. welcome back everybody. Here for the conclusion of Chapter 3 of Building Thinking Classrooms in Mathematics, Grades K through 12, by Peter Liljedahl. Anybody who's here, have you ever had a proper Pennsylvania Dutch or New England whoopie pie? Because we just found one in Yorkshire. Which, like, a little weird if I'm honest, but a little taste of home, so... Okay. So a few things cropped up in Peter Liljedahl's research. One is that groups should be close to each other, but not crowded. If you have groups of 3 that are more or less next to each other within a few feet, right, so that they don't have to cross a large distance to go talk with each other, they're more likely to talk with each other. That's actually good, because if you just get a couple of people, one person from your group to talk with one person from that group real quick about, what you might be stuck on, then there's more information exchange. If your members of your group go to other groups around the room to do the same thing, then again, there is more information exchange. They're close enough that it's not going to feel like an arduous task to go cross the Mojave, but... Again, you don't want them to feel like they're in a New York City subway, because then they're going to be annoyed with the people behind them immediately. Just be like, ugh, I keep bumping into you. This is a fun one. Groups should have one and only one marker. Now, as it is, the culture in the classroom could be, and this was actually brought up earlier when P. Vermi said, oh yeah, I've seen classes where, people have explicit roles. And, one person is the recorder, one person is the leader, one person is the gopher, etc., to go do the thing that they need to do. Again, you don't want the students to settle into any sort of group dynamic. You want them to be able to decide that they can take the lead for a minute. That they can ask, can I have the marker? And then start working on something, and then everybody else can contribute just verbally. Okay? Now, this is also an interesting dynamic that we had during COVID, right? The marker should change hands regularly. Now, at the end of class, I had all students take a one of the alcohol wipes that we had and wipe down the marker they had and wipe down the space that they had, as long as it wasn't on a whiteboard. Actually, like, alcohol is not too bad for a whiteboard, but there are some chemicals that if you wipe the whiteboard, it starts eating away at the permeability shield, whatever, and then it doesn't erase as well next time or the time after that or the time after that. So you have to be real careful. There was one of our janitorial staff who decided to wipe down the whiteboard with a floor cleaner. And let me tell you, the next time we wrote on it and tried to erase it, it just went all over the whole thing, and I went, oh no, that's not good. So it wiped, but it then smeared rather than actually like wiping it off. So that was bad. Okay. So typically, when every group member has their own whiteboard marker, it will eventually devolve, as Peter Liljedahl says, into 3 people doing the problem in parallel. So everybody's doing their own thing, and they don't collaborate the way that you want them. So you should have one and only one marker per group, and it should change hands regularly. If the marker is not changing hands regularly, you should instigate the change, not by walking over and saying you should give that up to somebody, but rather, here's the fun bit. Right? Walk up, give some sort of help, hint, or extension. Again, as needed. So like if this group's doing fine on their own, you don't have to really worry about that so much. I mean, maybe you just give them an extension so that... But if they're on track, right, it might be a little bit awkward. But point out something. Point out something. Right, or... and then just give the marker to someone else. Don't mention it. Don't bring it up. But you just say, hey, can I have that? Yep. Okay. And then you write something or you circle something. Say, like, I want to have this. I would like you to share this later when we do this. And then hand the marker to somebody else and walk away. Don't make a big deal of it. Don't, like, you know, make it seem like, oh, I need to have whatever. You just give the marker to somebody else and walk away. And typically, they'll just be like... What was that? But oftentimes, most of them will get the hint. Like, you know, you shouldn't be the person who's writing. You really should take turns giving everybody a chance to write. Because typically, again, when you're writing, you're not the one who's, like, doing the thinking. But at the same time, in your group, you might have just had a really great idea. So you want the marker just for a minute so you can write something on the board. Sometimes it inspires students to, like, oh, well, I have the marker, I gotta think of something, so let's try something. Right? Groups should have one and only one marker. Again, make sure that it changes hands regularly. If you don't have any other reason to do it, just walk up, circle something, tell them that you're really interested in this coming up later, or I like how you did this. Here's another challenge that you might think about, whatever, and then just give the marker to a different person. Preferably the person on the other side of you. Right? And maybe you're just a forgetful kind of person, but most of the time they kind of get the hint. And then you carry a different colored marker. So you carry one that's different so that you can go around and like circle, highlight, do some, pointing or whatever to things that you want to bring up later. I oftentimes would cordon off some, bit of information, and then later on we talk about what, why I wanted to highlight this particular thing. Oftentimes, even there would be some times where I'd be like, hey, this is really great. This is not quite where we want to go. Maybe maybe they went in a wrong direction or something like that. I would actually ask, can I use this? Even though it's not quite right, I would like to highlight this because this is really important. And oftentimes the groups would be like, yeah, okay. So I'd like cordon off their effectively mistake. And then later on we'd say, okay, now this is something that I'd like to really point out. Now here's the thing. The group never gets pointed out as being like, those people were in this group and they screwed up. They can sink back into the rest of the classroom and pretend that they're just part of the group looking at it and going, oh, yes, interesting. This is the first time I've ever heard of this. But as you're doing a lesson summary at the end of the lesson, we'll talk about this later. As you're doing a lesson summary at the end of the lesson, you discuss not just how things go right, but also how things go wrong. And again, you don't point out the students. In fact, it's better, this is highlighting something, foreshadowing for later. It's actually better if you ask other people to describe what's going on the board. So you point out, you ask for people, would you mind, anybody who notices, would you mind pointing out a little thing about, what are your impressions of what you see here? Summarize what you see on this board. Somebody who is not in this group, please summarize. All right, if your color is prominent and consistent, neighboring groups start noticing that you pointed something out and will start looking at your color specifically and being like, wait, ooh. Yeah, Mr. Obi over there just highlighted something. We got to pay attention to that. And again, it doesn't have to be 100% right. It could be something that is wrong. But again, they start looking at that and noticing, is it something right? Is it something wrong? Oh, let's think about it. And let's not just follow that example, but let's think about why this is highlighted now. Why did he highlight that? It becomes a hugely effective teaching tool. Okay. FAQs. You talk about knowledge mobility as if it's a good thing. Won't the vertical surfaces just make it easier for groups to copy each other? So in all the years that I've been in classrooms where teachers are using vertical non-permanent surfaces, I can count on one hand the number of times that I saw a group just literally copying line for line, symbol for symbol, what another group had done without doing any thinking of their own. It just doesn't happen. In a culture that values thinking as opposed to getting the right answer, there's no motivation to just get the right answer. Right? So this is going to be one of the most important things. motivate thinking, not answers. So we start talking about different ways of getting to a problem, or getting at a problem, right? Different ways of attacking something, different ways of thinking. Do not say like, oh, this is the correct answer. We want to talk about what the thinking is that gets people around these problems. And if we happen to get to the right answer, great. If we don't, let's think about why we didn't get to the right answer. Even if nobody in the room got there, right? Let's start thinking about why not. What is it about the way that we're thinking that is not conducive to getting the right answer? So students look around and see what others have done, and then use that as inspiration for what they should try next. Sometimes even just talking to other groups about what they did. And while working on thinking tasks, students generate a lot of ideas to try. These are, again, the tasks at the beginning of class that are not necessarily related to curriculum. In fact, they're better if they're not related to curriculum, that will motivate good thinking. Knowledge mobility is just another source for ideas for them to try, and it's a natural consequence of the porosity of group boundaries as we discussed in Chapter 2. Question: if we're only giving each group one marker, how do I ensure that everyone's contributing? So this is what we were saying earlier. The quick answer is that you move the marker around. This can be done by using varying degrees of subtlety. For example, every time you visit a group, you casually ask for the marker from whoever's holding it, and then when you leave, you just hand it to a different person. When you're first starting it out, giving it to the student standing furthest from the board is a good strategy. This is subtle. Less subtle is asking the group who hasn't held the marker and then giving it to that student. Even less subtle is setting a timer that's loud enough for everybody to hear and telling them it's time to switch. After a very few weeks, students will begin automatically just moving the markers around. Moving the marker sounds great, but what if I have a student who has nothing to contribute? What good is it going to do them to have the marker? In these cases, you can add a rule, either for just this group or the whole class. Whoever is holding the marker is not allowed to write any of their own ideas. They can only act as a scribe for what others say. Not only does this improve communication within the group, it also ensures that the group moves at the pace of the slowest learner. It also reduces the likelihood that one very quick thinker takes over the work while others watch passively. If you couple this with a strategy that a group does not get the next task or extension unless every single group member can explain how they solved it, then you're necessitating that group members take care of each other and make sure that everybody's learning. My class has a wide range of abilities. How well will this work for them? First, every class has a wide range of abilities. This is a defining quality of classrooms. However, the data upon which you're basing this assertion comes from how students performed with your previous class norms. Once you get students thinking in random groups and on vertical surfaces, the playing field is sufficiently altered to allow new abilities to emerge. Every teacher who has done this has come to the realization that some of whom they thought were their best students are actually quite weak at thinking tasks, and some of whom they thought were their weak students are actually very good at thinking tasks. This is not to say that your previous information is completely wrong, but rather that it is not nearly as relevant when you go to the random and vertical stages that we talked about up above. The wide range you see in your students' abilities when they're working individually in their notebooks is a product of their hugely varied acquisition and retention of mathematical knowledge, not their thinking ability. That's huge. When students get into their groups and start working on vertical surfaces, the skills they need to be successful are things like communication, perseverance, patience, self-reliance, etc. And although these skills will vary throughout the room, the variance is typically not nearly as great as with prior mathematical knowledge. I've tried this, but I find that my students are too eager to erase things that are wrong and then lose track of what they've done. So how do I stop this? The freedom to erase is vital to the students who feel feeling safe and to try and fail and try again. So at one level, we don't want to stifle their freedom. At another, however, when they erase too much, it can become detrimental to their ability to move forward. At the same time, we want them to be comfortable with their mistakes. There are two answers. First is just wait. The urge to erase typically goes away after a while, and they begin to erase only when they run out of room. The second answer is to talk to these students, but only after they've been working on vertical non-permanent surfaces for a few weeks. You can then suggest that they draw a box around things that they want to erase and draw a single line through it. Call it slow garbage. Alternatively, or additionally, you can talk about how all ideas are still valuable and even things that are wrong have some value. Like we said, if you highlight these answers as or these paths as being, necessarily a good thinking task in the classroom, tell them that, yeah, sure, you went down the wrong path, but this is still valuable in helping other people understand, what not to do, but you don't want to phrase it like that. In phrasing like how sometimes our thinking can go down maybe the wrong path, but it motivates more thinking. That was what we were trying to get at before. Either way, you need to be careful not to constrain their freedom to erase too much or too soon. One area where you can impose more constraints is around the erasing of others' work. This can diminish a student's contribution, which is never okay. You should set rules that students are never allowed to erase someone else's work without permission. One other thing that I liked to do if you have everybody take pictures of their boards, you can also download this onto, or have everybody upload their pictures onto like the Canvas classroom boards, some sort of file repository where you say, hey, look, this is what we did. This is what we had during the day. Yeah. So I started doing it in, 2014, I think. One of my colleagues had an iPad, and it was like, the first iPad, the first generation of iPads. Maybe it was before that. Anyway, he walked over and started taking pictures of all of his boards when he was writing on the board. And again, wrote everything down, take pictures of all three boards, and then erase as we go across. So it's kind of standard stuff. I did that for years on end when I was doing, lecture. And then I kept doing it when I was doing building thinking classrooms. And I thought that it seemed to help a little bit, maybe, in that people could look back over the work that was done. The only problem was that if we were using the Windows, it was extremely hard to take pictures of the stuff that was on the windows. Because one, your phone always wants to focus on outside. Two, you don't get the same, again, your background, whatever the background is outside, acts as camouflage. So unless you have something that is effectively one color, you're not going to see all of the marks that are on the window. It was really frustrating to try to figure it out. So I had to, like, get way down like this and then take a picture going up at the sky, basically. And not every classroom and not every window had that ability. So I was like, well, that's just the way it's going to be. We took a picture of the window and put it on there, and we're like, maybe that one's not particularly helpful, but yeah, if you can see it, great. Right, so the macro move here is to use vertical, non-permanent surfaces. And the micro moves that we're doing here. One marker per group. Decide how you want to move it around. Again, subtlety might be key, or you could be less subtle if somebody's not getting the hint. Optional rule. Person that is writing cannot write their own ideas. And in that way, somebody might want to hot potato this thing to somebody else and be like, all right, I got an idea. Groups close, not crowded. And discuss with the students. Value all ideas. Don't erase others' work. All right. I did not prep any work on the questions to think about, but nonetheless. What are some things in this chapter that feel immediately correct? Feel free to add anything if anybody else wants to. Seeing the numbers on the chart for me was absolute bonkers. Particularly, again, time to first notation. But at the same time, like, it made sense to me why these numbers were the way they were, where they were. The idea of these, the whiteboards particularly being impermanent, is going to allow students to just feel free to make mistakes, take more risks, do stuff that is eventually wrong, but not stress about it. And again, vertical, like writing on big paper, is getting that feeling like this should be a final draft. It needs to be displayed to the entire class. Everybody's going to see this. What if I screw up? And then writing in your personal notebook, again, you want it to be correct because it's your personal notebook. But at the same time, maybe you don't care quite as much. Because, again, it's your personal notebook, so this is your personal space. So you're willing to start writing on it quickly. And then again, less discussion, less eagerness to like get into the task and help each other on this work, because again, it's your notebook is like the standard model. It's what you're always doing. Every other class, it's what you're doing. And again, the paper is going to be less of that interest because you've got all of that weight that's kind of pushing on you to say like, I don't want to write anything down. Let's wait until we get it right. Let's talk it out first. What must change in your classroom in order for you to gain the wall space necessary to get all of your students working on a vertical, non-permanent surface? Hi, Famished. I'm Obi. How's it going? So in my room, I requested all rolling whiteboards like as soon as possible, and I got like 2. So that didn't help. I mean, it helped a little, but not really. We had I requested another whiteboard in the back of the room, which did not come by the time I left. Like, it came, but it wasn't mounted. I was like, come on. And then we ended up using the windows in that particular room, which again is the room that the housekeeping staff like sabotaged the blinds to make sure that we couldn't put them back up. Yeah. I mean, I love whiteboards. I love working on whiteboards. I have one to hand right here, and then we have this void space, which literally is an infinite whiteboard. Or blackboard. Yeah, I got this one. Huh. That's Elite Dangerous stuff. But yeah, I have one side that's a marker or grid graph space, and one side that is just open whiteboard. So I got this for free. It was so awesome. It was they were giving these away at NCTM when I went in like 2012 or something like that. Philadelphia. I drove up to Philadelphia with 3 of my colleagues, all of whom were grandmothers, and I was the only man and also basically the new hire. So it was like, this is really awkward. We're driving for 3 hours. And this is before coffee. So yep, Obi before coffee. Whew. Which strategy for moving the marker around did you like the best and why? Absolutely walking up, asking for their marker, doing something, and then giving it to somebody else. Loved it. I loved executing it every single time. And like most of the time, the groups were like, that was weird. Like they didn't even notice. But coffee's the worst. Oh, I'm sorry. I also like tea. But I cannot get on board with the like steeped mushrooms or whatever that they're trying to like replace coffee with. It's just it's not going to work, guys. In this chapter, you read about the notebook as a catch-all, the place where we default to have students do all their work. Think about all the different types of things that you ask students to do in their notebooks. Which of these, other than doing thinking tasks, can you imagine having them do on vertical non-permanent surfaces instead? So, I mean, the obvious thing is all of their notes, right? I will say that there is an appropriate place for notes in their notebook, but the important part is getting them to understand what notes actually are. Notes are not literal word-for-word transliterations of what is on the board to their paper, right? Notebooks are intended, and notes are intended, to be the shorthand versions of things that will get you to remember automatically what was already up there. So what are the things that are unique to you that are going to be necessary to help you understand and remember what needs to be remembered? Anything that you're like, yeah, I've got that. 2 plus 2 is 4, obviously. 4 squared is 16, obviously. You don't need to copy that down. You know what that is. Right? Notes are the important part of what is going to get you from point A to point B without any of the frills, without any of the obvious stuff that you just can automatically recall. What else happens in your classroom that can be enhanced by having students work on vertical non-permanent surfaces? So after having done this model, and again, let's get his, oops, nope. Let's get his book up here again. So this is the book we're working out of, Peter Liljedahl's Building Thinking Classrooms. If you are not planning on being a math teacher, this is probably not worthwhile for you. But if you are planning on being a math teacher, or potentially being another teacher who would be interested in trying this in some other subject, that's a weird one. Okay, cool. If you're not interested in becoming a teacher of some kind, then this is absolutely, don't even bother looking at it. Maybe encourage your local library to buy a copy or something like that. You had to switch back to paper notes because it was easier. Already started, might as well finish. Yeah. Gonna switch to digital and print it, put it in a binder. When you have physical notes, you're forced to look at it. That's also true. There has been some research which says that anytime that you are physically writing, it is easier to remember. So if you're just typing, there is no significant improvement. However, when you are forced to physically write notes by hand, there is a marked improvement in students' ability, both to recall information and performance on exams. I would love to be able to find that for you, but I don't know. I do not have access to well, I have access to archive, but I don't know if I've seen any of that. Got to get yourself a tablet. Yeah. I know that one of my colleagues was an early adopter of all things Apple, and he absolutely loved his iPad for taking notes, because then he could write physically and then also hit the little button at the bottom, which would send a digital copy immediately to his iCloud, which then he could download and then upload to Canvas for his students. Eventually, Canvas got somebody to work on this, and they were able to integrate a upload to Canvas portion to the iPad. So, whatever app he was using was then able to automatically upload to Canvas. And he was like, yes, this is much better. Thinking of getting one anyway for remote access. Could work. What are some challenges you anticipate you will experience in implementing the strategies suggested in the chapter, and what are some ways to overcome these? So, I definitely had issues with students who, as was said in a couple of different places, would not engage, decided that they were above all of this math stuff or whatever. And a lot of cases, it turned out to be just a confidence thing. They didn't want to do it because they just were worried that they were going to look foolish, or as Peter Liljedahl says in a couple of places, like, the more stuff that is between you and them, so desks, tables, chairs, etc., the more they're going to be willing to disengage. If we could get the chairs away from the window, right? We had chairs attached to desks, which it says in here explicitly, chairs attached to desks get students to disengage more. Right? Like, seriously? So he worked on this for his research, and if you can get the desks and chairs and tables away from the surfaces that you're using, the students are far less likely to use them. I mean, no kidding, right? And far more likely to start talking with each other and walking around the room in order to find out, hey, is this going to work for me? Is this idea that's on this board up here, is this going to work for me? So some ways to overcome this, again, moving the furniture around so the students don't really feel able to sit at desks or chairs or anything like that, oftentimes works. Okay, now that you've read the first 3 chapters, you may want to try some of these ideas out in your classroom. As mentioned in the introduction, it is best to implement these first 3 chapters' ideas, thinking tasks, frequent visibly random groups, and vertical non-permanent surfaces together. The reasons for this are discussed more in chapter 15, which discusses bringing it all together. For now, if you're ready to try these tasks, here are some engaging non-curricular thinking tasks for you to start out with. Recall from chapter 1, it's best to do 3 to 5 lessons of these types of tasks before shifting to scripted curriculum thinking tasks. It seems bonkers to be like, okay, well, we're just going to do 3 entire classes where we're getting you acclimatized to this stuff and not anything that's actually directly related to, the curriculum. But it is actually necessary if you're truly trying to do this. Right? Come up with 3 to 5 full lessons, or at least 3 to 5 hours worth of these thinking tasks. Highly engaging non-curricular thinking tasks. There we go. Recall from chapter 1, chapters 2 and 3 state it's important to have students in random groups working on vertical non-permanent surfaces. Utilizing all of these micro moves from all 3 of the first chapters will enhance the experience. So to start, you might want to, 1, avoid setting up the tasks so that they can be solved through mimicking, right? Make something that has to be thought about for a while, not just like copy a process. Randomize in a way that it is visible to the students. In grades K through 2, form groups of 2, and in grades 3 through 12, form groups of 3. Set up your method of randomization such that it tells students where to go in the classroom. Only have 1 marker per group. And have groups in close proximity to each other, but not crowded. Okay, so 6 shapes. 2 squares, 2 triangles, 2 circles. What color is each of these shapes if 1. Blue has no corners. 2. Green is between red and black. 3. Green is left of orange. And 4. Purple is next to red. This is grades K through 3. Right? Getting students to discuss amongst their groups and then to think about how you would go about solving this problem. Grades 4 through 7. How many 7s are there? If I were to write the numbers from 1 to 100, how many times would I write the digit 7? What if I wrote all the numbers from 1 to 1,000? How many digits 7 would there be? How about how many zeros would there be? Grades 8 through 12. Split 25. So, decompose the number 25 using addition. So, example, 25 is equal to 10 plus 15, which is the same as 10 plus 10 plus 5, which is the same as 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 16. What is the biggest product you can make if you multiply all of these addends together? Note, the examples that are given will bias an assumption that the addends must be whole numbers. However, the instructions do not specify this. So, let this fact emerge after they've found a maximum for whole numbers. So one idea would be to, explicitly come up with an example that is better than one that they could come up with. So find the best example using whole numbers and then intentionally choose one that has decimals that is better than it, but only maybe just a little, not the overall optimal answer. Okay. That will conclude chapter 3. What we doing? No. Where do students work in a thinking classroom? So again, vertical non-permanent surfaces while standing is the best option. There will be occasions where you will have students who cannot stand for that length of time, and that is okay. They're going to do whatever they need to do. But the idea is to get students to be intentionally uncomfortable and not in a state of relaxation. All right. Next Monday, we're going to deal with Chapter 4, which is how we arrange the furniture in a thinking classroom. So if there is any furniture, how do we arrange it? And if there isn't furniture, why not? If anybody else has any ideas, questions, comments, concerns, or any ideas for hey, I need to do this problem, let me know. I'm going to zoom out here. And we're going to export the image as a PNG. Right, cool. Cool. That is not what I wanted. 319? No. You are not 319. That is ridiculous. Alright, rename. This is 2025. Last week was 07. fourth. Damn it. Is 35 minus 7 is 28. Alright. Building thinking classrooms 02. And then this week, rename 2025 0804 BTC 03. Oh, looks like I might have deleted previous weeks as well. That's too bad. Alright, well, pictures, math. Oh, no, I didn't. Haha. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I think I deleted. Yep, I deleted the 21st. Didn't save it. Oh, well. Okay, this is BTC 00 impetus. We'll add a new folder and call it Building Thinking Classrooms. We'll shove all that stuff into there. Cool. All right. Let's get thinking about rating. So, I want to thank everybody for coming on in. And we are unfollowing that person? Okay. Lol. We will look at a few different places here. So Dr. Gold is in and is working on differential equations. Absolutely. Let's go. So I want to thank everybody for coming on in. We will be back probably tomorrow, depending on how I'm feeling, for the Swapper, which is that weird game that my brother bought me, where we are essentially turning into the ship of Theseus by deleting ourselves over and over and over again. And we're also going to be back on Wednesday to do more GRE prep. Cracking the GRE. And if anybody is interested in, again, asking any other questions, feel free to do so anytime that I'm on, because I will take a break from games. That is perfectly fine. As well as taking a break from whatever it is that I have scheduled. I don't care. I'll still work on it. It's good stuff. So, thanks so much for coming on in. I will see you tomorrow or Wednesday, or who knows, as late as Thursday and Friday if you all only come in for certain streams. So, hope you all have a good rest of your week. My name's VNPSes. This is NSimplex Pachinko. We'll see you later.